Good evening, everyone. I'm Josie Warden and I'm Head of Regenerative Design at the RSA, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's event. To mark Fashion Revolution Week, this event is taking place as part of Fashion Revolutions Week's Open Fashion Studio programme, which highlights and showcases the designers and initiatives that are changing the fashion industry for the better. So if those of you watching along would like to join in the conversation, then you're welcome to do so on Twitter using the hashtag RSA Fashion or hashtag Fashion Open Studio, or in our YouTube chat. I'm really delighted today to have the chance to talk to Patrick Grant and Rob Greenland, who are joining us to discuss how local makers and wearers can play their role in changing the fashion system we have for the better, and particularly why locally rooted action is really important for creating systemic change. So I'm going to briefly introduce them before we get started. So Patrick Grant is a designer and a judge on the BBC's Great British Sewing Bee. And in 2016, Patrick launched Community Clothing, a social enterprise selling quality and affordable clothing and creating good jobs in the UK. Patrick's joining us from his factory in Blackburn today, so we'll be finding out a bit more about that in a second. And we're also joined by Rob Greenland, who is co-director of Zero Waste Leeds, a social enterprise aiming to help people reduce their waste and live more sustainable lives. So Rob has spent most of his career in social enterprise, and in 2010 set up Social Business Brokers, which develops collaborative solutions to complex social challenges. And I'm really lucky to have been working with Rob over the last few months on the Leeds Fashion Futures programme, which has been exploring how to work with people in the city of Leeds to create a more sustainable future for the city in regards to fashion. So thank you so much both for joining us.
Thank you for hosting.
Really good to see you. Actually, I wondered, Patrick, if we could start with you. I know you're in the factory. Could you tell us a little bit more about Cookson and Clegg and Community Clothing and your mission and the work that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I'd be delighted. Cookson and Clegg began life as manufacturers of boot uppers and mill straps. They were leather couriers, which is the process that happens after tanning. They moved into clothing in the 1930s and making flying helmets and dispatch riders' jerkins for the military, and they continued making for the military until 2009. When all the military clothing contracts went to firms that were manufacturing overseas. So they tried to reposition themselves into high-end garments, and they did that quite successfully. And today they have customers like Nigel Caborn and Finisterre and Margaret Howell and Labour and Weight and Hetro Co and others, who are British manufacturers selling product predominantly in Britain and Japan, but all of whom want to have a made in Britain label on their product. In 2015, I got an email on a Sunday evening from the CEO of Cookson and Clegg, who actually used to sit in this office, saying, that's it, we're closing the factory. Unfortunately, the parent company that owned Cookson's at the time, who are a big manufacturer of textiles, specifically for military and medical applications, had decided that they didn't see a future in UK manufacturing for the products they were making. And so they decided to close it down. And so I emailed him back and said, look, is there anything we can do about this? And he said, well, so the following day we spoke, and within a couple of months, we'd taken over Cookson and Clegg. And at the time, I was running eTorts, Norton & Sons and Hammond & Co. Unfortunately, I had a little bit of money spare, which allowed us to take the factory over and absorb its losses for a few years. But it was clear that we needed to make some quite big changes to the way it operated. And it was clear to me also at the time that lots of other factories were in similarly perilous positions with regards to their long-term future. And these are businesses that are incredibly important to the places where they are based. Blackburn is a textile town. Its wealth was built on the textile industry, and we're one of the last textile businesses here. And I think it's not just about the money that goes in people's pockets and the money that flows into the local economy. It's also about a sense of civic identity. It's about a source of pride in the community. It's a source of individual pride. There's lots tied up in our manufacturing businesses beyond just pounds and pennies. And I recognised that that was important, not just here in Lancashire, where we have quite a few factories we work with now for community clothing, but also in places like the Scottish Borders, the East Midlands, where textiles dominated the kind of economic landscape. Also Leeds, Bradford, the parts of West Yorkshire where woolen textiles were absolutely dominant. Many of those communities have been pretty much ripped apart at the seams by the disappearance of large-scale textile production in the UK. So I felt it was really important to try and do something that allowed those remaining businesses to stay in business, and hopefully to try and find a way to allow them to start to grow again. And so at the same time, I thought, there is a real lack on the British High Street of really first-rate quality clothing at an affordable price, made using really good, sustainable, natural materials, made ethically, and all of the things that, again, I think many of us would now like to ensure we support with our clothing choices. But most of that really good quality clothing comes at a really hefty price, or at least a fairly hefty price. The stores that when I was growing up 500 years ago would have been in the mid 70s to mid 80s. You could walk down any high street and buy phenomenal quality clothing, made really well, made out of really good stuff that would last a really good, a really long time. I mean, most of the stuff that is currently doing the rounds in secondhand shops, charity shops, vintage dealers, it's stuff that was made prior to the big changes that we've seen recently in clothing. It was made out of wool, made out of heavy duty cotton jersey, really great stuff that would last for ages. Anyway, so I thought, where is this stuff? Where can we get it now? And the answer was pretty much nowhere. I mean, unless you are prepared to pay hefty designer prices. So I thought there's a big gap there. There are factories desperate for work. There are people who'd really like to buy affordable everyday clothes. And it seemed really obvious just to try and marry the two up. And so the idea behind community clothing was really simple. We designed a range of really nice quality everyday clothes. We started by establishing what the price needed to be. We started by, at the same time we said, right, we're only going to be using really, really high quality raw materials, really good quality fabrics. How do we build a business model that allows us to sell that quality of stuff made in great UK factories and sell it affordably? And so that was the thinking behind community clothing was quite simple. We can do away with loads of the normal costs involved in doing business. Obviously, we can do away with the retail costs. We do it direct, sell direct on the internet. We get rid of all the seasonal collections. So we only, we design a product and we leave it alone. And, we try and design the best version of every product we've got, but we don't change it from season to season. We have a really stable supply chain that's local to us. That doesn't mean we have to be flitting around the globe trying to find cheaper and cheaper factories every season. We work with our factories on a long-term basis. We give them orders that they can place in the quiet periods of their calendar, which means that their efficiencies go up, which means their costs come down, which means our costs come down. So there's loads that we thought about. And we thought, well, if we make great quality clothing and we make it at a good price, and we know that people really want to support British manufacturers and high quality goods, then we thought, well, we probably don't need to spend that much money on marketing because the product should speak for itself. And that's exactly what we've done. So we cut out probably 60 to 70% of the normal cost involved in running a clothing business by our really simple model. And that means that we can sell affordable stuff that's really good. And that's where it all started. And, I feel like I've talked too long now, but, we started it in 2016 and it has gone from strength to strength. And, we've still got a long way to go, but, we're off to a good start.
It's such an amazing and really inspiring story. I think I wonder if I come to Rob on your side. You've been working at, I guess, kind of almost the other end of the supply chain and seeing what happens when in a city and the amounts of waste that you get. Could you talk us through a little bit the work that you've been doing on fashion and the kind of perspective from the citizen side.
So, I mean, so Zero Waste Leeds is a project we set up in 2018, and we've been looking at a whole different range of kind of issues around waste. And what we try to do is always focus on things that are kind of practical and relevant to people's lives, and hopefully get them kind of interested, and then also obviously then kind of wasting a bit less. And it kind of makes a lot of sense to look at clothing and fashion as one of the themes. And we started looking at it probably about 18 months ago now or something. And it was basically when we heard a stat from the council that suggested that 4,000 tons of clothing and textiles ends up in householders' kind of bins each year in Leeds. And we broke that figure down a little bit, and it kind of equates to about 12 kilos per household in Leeds. And it's quite a lot of clothing and textiles, and not all of that will be stuff that could be worn again, but there'll be clothing within that. There could be either repaired or upcycled or swapped or given away or whatever. So we basically set up a zero waste fashion project. We just did a zero waste fashion week. I mean, it was literally 2 or 3 weeks, probably, well, a month after lockdown started last year. So it was all online, but basically looking at all the different ways that people could waste less, which, as I say, things like, looking after your clothes better, repairing them, reusing them, using charity shops again when they reopen, looking at clothes swaps and all that kind of thing. And basically just trying to work with people to help people see what they can do. Because I think one of the things I really like with what Patrick's doing is that sometimes people feel quite powerless with this stuff. That they know there's things wrong with the clothing system, and they'd like to clothe themselves better, but they don't know what to do sometimes. Whereas we're just trying to give people a few kind of practical opportunities to take control a little bit of their clothing choice, whether that be, kind of maybe buying fewer things but better things, things that from community clothing suppliers or wherever, or looking to kind of look after your clothes a bit more. We just tried to kind of focus on that. So we've been doing that probably 12 to 18 months now. And then as he said at the start, we've been working with the RSA on Leeds Fashion Future as well, kind of taking some of those themes and getting into them in a bit more detail.
I think it's really interesting. I think there are loads and loads of things that people can do that are really easy steps. I mean, the first thing, is to realize just how much clothing just gets put in the bin. It's not that difficult to save your waste clothing and take it to a textile recycling bin. There are lots of them around the place, but if you don't, and I think you guys do a map, which I remember seeing quite some time ago, of where you can go. But this is all things that are free, that aren't going to cause you too much bother. But just simply not throwing clothes in the bin is a good start. And then all the things that you can do after that. We've been making pieces for the eTorts catwalk show out of clothing that we've had from clothing recycling bins. We've got a customer of ours at Norton & Sons. He runs a big clothing recycling business. And what staggered me, I knew that we threw a lot of clothes away, but when we talked about throwing clothes away, I sort of thought we meant giving clothes to charity shops and putting them in recycling centres. What really staggered me was that sort of 70 or 80% of the clothes we throw away, we just literally chuck in the bin. And the clothing that I got from him, we asked him for jeans and for white shirts, for cotton jeans and for white cotton shirts. And he said, well, how much do you want? And I said, well, I don't know how much you got. And he said, well, I've got hundreds of tons of these things. So, it sort of staggered me, the amount of clothing. And this stuff arrived at the eTort studio in London. And almost all of the shirts were perfectly wearable. Some of them were a little bit discolored in the collar, but we managed, what we did, we just salvaged the textile. We cut them all up at the seams, and then we patchworked it together, and then we laid it out and cut new things on it. But not everybody has the ability to do that. But I think there is so much that we can do that are things that I remember doing as a kid. I mean, jumble sales and swap shops. I mean, the biggest show on TV when I was a kid was Noel Edmonds' swap shop. I mean, swapping was normal, and we thought nothing of it, and all of that stuff just disappeared. And I think the biggest I think the big thing that we've all got to do, and I think I'm probably jumping ahead, but what we're trying to do at Community Clothing is to make people find happiness in keeping their clothing for a longer time. But by deliberately not having seasonal collections, we're saying the clothes you have are great. If you love that t-shirt and the more you wear it, the more you should love it. And actually, if you repair it, that makes it better. You're sort of putting more value into it by the time you've spent repairing it. And, again, there's a sort of very big mindset change that I think is starting to happen amongst people that is really based around just being happier to have fewer clothes and to treat the clothes we have in a better way. And so, I have been following what you've been doing, Rob, over time, and it just strikes me that just by doing what you're doing, you're allowing people to feel better about not buying new clothes all the time. I think we are both we're both in part of the clothing industry, but you're sort of in the clothing industry, where we're kind of pushing against this giant machine that desperately wants to convince people that the way to be happy is to buy more stuff, literally every week. Let's Monday night, 6 o'clock, let's sell you more stuff. And, many of them are going around doing some bits of sustainable stuff, but their message is still absolutely loud and clear: buy more clothes all the time. And what we're trying to say is, just don't do that. Just make a conscious decision to not buy so many clothes and be happy with what you got. So sorry, I've probably jumped ahead of there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I think there are, I think one of the things, again, we can't talk about opportunities in the last 12 months. However, there are opportunities in terms of people's changes in people's behavior around things like buying clothes. There will have been some people who've been buying loads and loads of clothes online, but loads of us who've our wardrobes have shrunk, and we've probably worn the same stuff nearly all the time, but maybe thinking slightly differently about what are the clothes that we do need. But maybe, as I say, this thing of maybe buying fewer things but better things and looking after them more, learning to repair and things. So I think there's definitely we've even just in our kind of followers, we can see a kind of shift in people's thinking just over the last 12 months, I think. So I think there are there's definitely positive.
Well, I think there are sometimes people that argue that all of the clothing industry generates an awful lot of income, it generates a lot of economic value, but I think it's arguable that you could have a much smaller industry doing things in a much better way, making higher quality products out of higher quality raw materials that consume fewer of Earth's resources, still use more human time, so therefore create more economic value that way. And you wouldn't sell as many, but each one that you sell is a slightly higher or even a moderately higher price. You can still create the same amount of economic value whilst doing less damage. And we can all feel better about the purchases that we make, because we know everybody down the chain is being treated well, everyone engaged in it is being paid fairly, all the materials being sourced. The problem that we've got with things like cotton, the problems of the cotton industry are well documented. But the big problem is not cotton itself. You can grow cotton in a perfectly sustainable way. The problem is if you need to grow 25 trillion tons of cotton in a space that isn't designed for it. That's where you get the problems. And again, I think there are so many opportunities for people to make changes that don't destroy economic value, won't hinder our economic, at least, there's an argument that we don't need economic growth anyway, but it won't destroy our economy. And also that you then create opportunities for new parts of the economy. So, repair cafes and swap shops and upcyclers, people making clothes out of old stuff. That creates all sorts of new economic activity that might replace some of the, we've seen a lot of retailers go out of business this year, particularly in the clothing industry. Where do those people find work? Well, you reshape the job opportunities within the industry and put the work where it's not going to do anything damaging. In fact, where it's actually kind of environmentally enhancing.
I think what's really exciting about, I guess, both of your work is that it's coming from that challenge from those different angles and thinking about how that works locally, like where people live, where people are working. Because I think we're so used to thinking of the industry as this, and it is, huge global machine. But actually, when you think about what difference can this make where I live to the people that are around me, to my communities, and you both, I mean, I know heritage has played a big role in both of the kind of the work that you've been doing. How do you think we can kind of build on the heritage of UK manufacturing as a kind of sense of pride, but also thinking about not kind of what it used to be, but maybe what it could be going forwards?
Well, I don't think I've spoken to you about this project, Josie, but I think, I mean, it's probably something that you will find interesting. I've been engaged with a couple of different organisations over the last couple of years, just following what they're doing and directly engaged with one of them. So I've done some work with the ladies behind Earth Logic, and obviously I've been following what Fibershed have been doing over a longer period of time, I mean, and looking at this idea of how you reshape an industry to create more local value and to create environmentally positive outcomes from an industry that's not in particularly good shape right now in that regard. So we're doing a project this year in Blackburn where we are taking a piece of a bit of disused scrubland in the town that the council owns, and we're going to grow flax and woad, and obviously from the flax we will extract the fibers, and we will spin linen yarn, and we will weave linen cloth, and from the woad we will extract a natural indigo dye. So we will make, the idea is that we're going to make some denim. So we're going to make natural indigo dyed linen denim. Original denims were linen, and then we're going to make it here in the town. And then the idea is that beyond that, we want to start to, so this year we're just going to do a small pilot. We've got a couple of spaces where we'll grow. The idea is that the communities that live next to these spaces will be engaged with the growing, the planting. We're actually due to plant next Friday, plant our flax next Friday anyway. It's got a 100-day growing cycle. And then all of this, so we will get the community involved with cultivating all of this. We're also going to look at the biodiversity value that we create and the regenerative agricultural soil benefits that we create. So we've got a couple of universities looking at that bit of it, and then we want to get people involved with learning how to do spinning and weaving on old machinery, but in parallel we will be using very state-of-the-art machinery also, because we'd like, what we want to do is engage everybody in this activity, which we can do very simply by using old mechanical scutchers and breakers and hacklers, and do it in a very 17th century, 16th century way. But we also need to look at doing it in the most advanced way, because what we do want is to hopefully demonstrate that you can create a sustainable local textile economy that is literally growing its own clothes. And there are obvious models where this works. If you look at the Harris Tweed industry, that is a similar thing. In the past, I'm not sure that it's exactly the case now, but in the past, all of the wool would have come from the Hebridean Islands. I think they get a bit from the mainland now, but the wool was locally grown, processed centrally, distributed out. So the wool was scoured and cleaned and dyed and spun within one, or actually used to be a number of central larger spinners. It would then be woven in a distributed network of small weavers. It would then come back to be centrally finished and accredited, and then loads of people on the island would also be making things out of Harris Tweed that they would sell either internationally or sell to people who came to the island to visit, or they would use themselves. So it's not like this is a kind of fantasy project. There are existing textile communities doing this, And we're hoping that we can demonstrate that it can be done on a kind of economically viable basis here. But also we just want to, there are loads and loads of other benefits, connectedness to nature, crafts, we know have a great role to play in improving people's physical and mental health, connectedness amongst the communities themselves. They may be citizens that have been isolated because of the pandemic, and this is a great way to reconnect people with their neighbors and the broader community that they live with. So this is something that we're hoping that we will run it over the next, 3 years. The plan is to do a pilot this year and to have, hopefully, possibly a pair of jeans that we make for the textile biennial, which is happening in Pennine, Lancashire in October of this year. And for the textile biennial that will happen in 2023, have a much larger scale, much more fully developed version of the project that we can unveil then. But we want people to get involved in any way that they can. We've got a fantastic network of practitioners and industry and academics. If you guys wanted to get involved, we'd be delighted to have your input on all of this also. But we want to get people. We think it's just a great fun project for people here to get involved with. But it has, we hope, it will also. We also know that the more people are engaged with nature, the more their other behaviours turn towards environmentally friendly practices. I mean, there's lots of research that says the more you get people doing this, the more of this stuff they do. And then you have this kind of lovely catalytic effect on the way whole communities think about, but probably not just their clothing and their sustainability of their clothing, but all of their waste and the way they treat all of that. I mean, hopefully we can collect all their compost and throw it on the land. I mean, all this great stuff. But we also want to try and instigate the creation of things like, Community Clothing had planned to do it last year anyway. We were going to start a repair cafe at our shop in Blackburn on a monthly basis. But, we'd like to do a repair cafe one Saturday, a swap shop or a clothing exchange on a different Saturday, run workshops that help people learn how to think differently about the clothes and textiles that they have in their homes.
Yeah, it sounds super exciting. And I think it's those kind of practical, like live projects that are around us that can help you see this in a completely different light. Because I think we are so used to engaging with fashion by going to the high street, but actually if you see it growing or creating jobs, or it's like a completely different way of seeing stuff. I think that's where, similarly with like the work we've been doing in Leeds, Rob, that sense of like, how can you look at your city differently in this sense? And it feels like you've been drawing a lot on the heritage as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Patrick's picked up already on the importance of kind of textile history to a place. Do you know what I mean? And that's very much true in Lancashire and Blackburn, and very much so kind of here in Leeds and Yorkshire. And one of the main themes in the Leeds Fashion Futures work has been about looking at the past. And Leeds, I've learned loads in terms of the great history that there is and what it's made Leeds the place that it is. And I suppose I think it's important for a few reasons really. One is that at the moment, I very much believe we've got a climate emergency, and there's loads of things we really need to kind of sort out fairly quickly. But that is very disconcerting for people. Do you know what I mean? And it's sometimes we kind of freeze when we don't know what to do when we're presented with something like that. And we found it quite useful to kind of take a step back to then start taking a step forward again, to try to imagine how things could be in the future by looking back and thinking, well, if it's the story of Montague Burton, who came here in 1900 as a 15-year-old, then within 4 years was setting up his first shop, and then 2 years later set up what would become the biggest factory, clothing factory in the world, I think it was at one stage. Looking back to that and what we can learn from that, how can we then kind of reimagine a different kind of future for clothing and textiles that has got sustainability kind of at the heart of it. So I think that I think it matters from that perspective. I think it's also just helped us have more broad conversations with people, because I think people just really they like talking about their city, and they're proud of the past that it's had, and then that can give us the kind of opportunity to then talk about things like, how might we kind of make our clothes in the future, look after them better, and that kind of thing. So it's been, I mean, to be honest, quite surprisingly, really, it's kind of surprised me how useful it's been to look at that kind of tradition, to then look to the future.
Well, I think it provides a really obvious blueprint for how things can be. And I remember I was having a conversation with somebody not that long ago, possibly a journalist, about our model, about slowing down, about making, having fewer but better things. And they said, well, how's that going to work? How can you keep the economy going? I said, well, we had a perfectly thriving, almost self-sufficient local clothing industry until quite recently. I mean, we didn't invent synthetics until the 1950s. Everything was made out of natural materials. We did it, up until the end of the 70s, at the end of the 18th century. I mean, most of the UK was largely self-sufficient. It wasn't until we started importing huge amounts of cotton that we went away from using wool and linen to make our clothes. I mean, it's not beyond the realm of man to imagine recreating something that looks far more like what we did in the past. And most of the practices that you guys are talking about are practices that almost every household in Britain was part of. I mean, I'm not that old, and I remember glass milk bottles and rinsing your milk bottles out, and reusing yogurt cup. I mean, everything in the house, everything that we had in the home was seen as a fairly precious resource. And it's only in the last 30 odd years that I think we've got to a point where we just see everything as being disposable, our clothing included. And I think we've got lazy, we've got used to the convenience of it. But again, I think there is something, it makes you feel good. I mean, I collect all my food waste and I compost it. I'm really good about reusing everything. I mean, containers and everything I've got, I think, well, I don't want to throw this stuff away. How can it be reused in some way within my house? Don't pass the problem on to somebody else. How can I use this stuff and get the full use out of it? And again, I think it's very easy to look back at an area like Blackburn and say, well, it was a big linen producer. We used to grow a lot of linen here. We used to grow a lot of woad. We used to make a lot of textiles. We used to make a lot of clothing. We did all this stuff here, and the UK economy was big and thriving in that period before there was globalized, manufacture of all of these products. And of course, we're not going to turn the clock back. But I agree with you that there's really useful local historical precedents that allow people to see. I think just showing people simple ways in which they can behave that change things for the better. I mean, we do it a lot with work. We're starting something big here with community clothing, or we hope we're starting something big. But I always talk to the team about what are we going to do this year. I mean, we don't need 1 million customers this year. We need 100 customers, and next year we need 200. And break everything down into little steps. And once you do that, every step becomes very manageable and very imaginable from ordinary people. And I think what your philosophy is great, because if we can make one easy change that makes a difference, we'll do it. If we feel overwhelmed by the scale of the changes we need to make, we will probably, as you say, be fairly paralyzed. But make a couple of small changes this week, and then if that goes well, make a change and make another one the week after, and eventually you'll have kind of transformed your sort of home economics and your way of life in a way that's really will make a massive difference, especially if everybody in a city the size of Leeds decides to do it.
No, you did right. And I mean that's why, again, one of the changes that we made last year in our work was to try to think about the work we were doing around waste, and particularly around clothing, and then think about what can be the social benefits out of that. How can people feel better about themselves or save some money or whatever it might be. And that's how we ended up setting up the school uniform exchange project.
Which is something I remember going to as a kid. I mean, all my school uniforms came from a school uniform exchange. I never had new school uniform. But again, you know, the blazers I had were, I mean, actually, my secondary school was a Harris tweed blazer, which looked like about 75 kids had worn it before I got to it. But it was great because I was only going to use it for a year or two, and then it was going to move on to somebody else. But, you know, the jumpers I wore to school were natural wool. There was, you know, there was quality built into all of this school uniform then that meant there was value in keeping it circulating through. But
and that's, no, you're absolutely right, and I think that's what's been interesting with the uniform is that it is cheaper now, without a doubt, and there's all sorts of negatives in that as well. But one thing we realised was that we needed to basically set up exchanges where people gave it away for free, because a lot of it doesn't have a great deal of kind of, you know, inherent monetary value, if you like, but it is really valuable to you if you're a family, again, particularly over the last 12 months. If you're kind of struggling financially, finding it difficult to find a uniform because, I mean, shops were closed for months as well last year, you know, we found it really useful to kind of set that up. But you're absolutely right as well. I mean, often we're almost kind of reinventing things that were a social norm 30, 40, 50 years or whatever, but we've got to kind of reinvent them for today.
And technology allows them to run better. I mean, there are loads of, you know, I'm a great eBay shopper. But there are loads of other platforms that, and I think what was interesting to me about eBay was that eBay started off as a brilliant way to trade secondhand product, and I think the success of Amazon made them slightly doubt their value to the world, and they sort of pursued a path of selling new product, and in the sort of vacuum that was created by eBay saying, well, we're all about selling you new stuff, and, you know, the marketplace is fine, but we're all for new stuff. All of a sudden, you've got loads of people like Vinted and Spock and, you know, all these newer kind of more fun-looking, more, you know, apps aimed at people of, you know, younger people that have come in and cleaned up, and I think it's, you know, it's. Technology allows us to do some of this stuff, you know, the swapping of clothes and other bits and pieces in a way that's really easy. You know, you used to have to wait for the Scout Jumble sale that would happen twice a year before you could go and do it. Now you can do it, you know, you do it sitting on the bus on the way to work.
Yeah, it's kind of as I say, reinventing these things for the era we're in now. It feels like both of you have been talking a lot about quality and value around like what we're valuing. And it's interesting, I think, increasingly that connection between value around nature and local areas, because I think, again, we've become quite disconnected between where our fibres come from and where our clothes come from, but also the kind of quality of material and what that means for the life of your clothing. That seems like a big focus of the work you're doing at Community Clothing. How can people kind of look for good quality?
Well, I mean, I get into trouble because, you know, I mean, I studied material science at Leeds, so I studied polymer science and you know, and I know that, you know, there are very durable synthetic textiles. You can make synthetic textiles that last a really long time. They're chemically very inert. They're abrasion resistant. But the whole idea of moving to synthetics in the first place was not about making clothes last longer. It was really about making clothes cheaper. And the problem we've got is that most clothing that's made out of synthetics is also made in the least expensive way it can be made. And, you know, consistently people are trying to find ways to shave money off the cost of manufacturing, and not just off the textile side, the dyeing side, the finishing side. I mean, all aspects. And people are looking at, you know, trying to squeeze cost out of the whole thing. You know, there are ways of making things that are good. I mean, my personal feeling is we should be trying to avoid using synthetics in clothing where we can, largely because it's, you know, it's not going to biodegrade. I think it's quite a complicated picture that you have to look at. I mean, certainly virgin synthetics feel like there is a growing kind of momentum against virgin synthetics, but obviously there's a lot of people using recycled synthetics, which of course, have some value, but the energy cost in creating recycled synthetics is more than the cost of creating virgin synthetics. So you've got, a CO2 kind of problem around recycled, that, there are no simplistic answers to all of this. I mean, my personal view is I would rather wear wool, I'd rather wear linen, I'd rather wear cotton. And I know that when you make really good quality textiles out of those materials, they will last a really long time. I mean, there's a 3,000-year-old linen shirt in one of the museums, and there's, this stuff can last if it's treated well. I've got lots of clothing in my wardrobe that was either my dad's or my grandfather's, or older bits of clothing that I've bought. I've got woolen coats that are 150 years old, still in beautiful condition, really wearable, lovely bits of clothing. Clothing that you can wear a lot, you can wash, you can repress, you can put it back into shape. And also, at the end of its life, you've got some really valuable stuff there. We're going down a path where fashion brands are using technology to strip cost out where they can. And, now we're in a situation where, you buy a t-shirt from Community Clothing, it's made out of a kind of 200-gram cotton. If you weighed one of our t-shirts, it would probably weigh more than twice as much as the equivalent t-shirt, because it's got twice as much material in it. There's the other thing is that you can't do this stuff on the cheap. If our sweatshirts are made out of a really heavy quality jersey, it's really obvious. I mean, it should be obvious to most people. If you've got a heavy material that's dense and sort of durable feeling, it'll take a long time to wear it out. If you've got something thin and lightweight, it'll wear out quite quickly. So the more, literally, physically, the more material you put into something, the longer it ought to last. I mean, it's the same with denim. You buy denim today that is, 9 ounces, and it's half elastane, and it's not half elastane, but it's got lots of polyester in it. It's got a bit of cotton. It's got a bit of elastane, and it feels like a pair of tights. Whereas real denim ought to be 12, 13, 14 ounces, and it will really last a long time. I mean, again, cotton is slightly less durable than some other materials, but you put enough of it in there, you just enjoy wearing it more. So our view is pretty straightforward. We're trying to make the best quality natural materials that we can. There are pros and cons certainly around recycled synthetics, but my view is, you're perpetuating the use of a material that will never disappear, basically. And unless you've got, I mean, honestly, I think some of the uses of recycled synthetics, early ones, they were using, taking plastic bottles and turning them into fleeces. And, we know that fleece sheds fibers at an enormous rate, certainly knitted. I mean, there are some stable synthetic fabrics where they won't shed fibers, but, there's a lot of synthetic materials where they are shedding a lot of material. And that material obviously works its way into the water systems, it works its way into the air, it finds its way also into the food chain, and then ends up being a pretty nasty pollutant. And again, we just don't see that stuff disappearing. You bury it in landfill for 70 years and it's still there. You take it out, you wash it, and it'd be usable again. I mean, I watched a fantastic documentary about landfill in Britain, and they were pulling clothes out the ground that had been buried in the 50s, or 60s rather, that were in perfectly usable condition. They've been underground for more than half a century. So my view, my view is, use less stuff, use natural stuff, and, buy the best thing that you can. And, we have to start, I know that for many people, actually, the economic reality is that they simply just couldn't even afford Community Clothing. And there isn't much more cost we can take out. So there will be people who can't even get to that level. But the sad thing is, I think there's a Terry Pratchett quote around it, and it was, it's about it was about the cost of boots, and a good pair of boots cost 100 quid that would last for 50 years. A cheap pair of boots costs £10, but you have to replace them 50 times during that period. And so there needs to be, I don't know how we get around this, but people need to be educated on the kind of long run cost of their clothing. But if they think that for reasons of fashion they're going to have to change them every 6 months anyway, then why would you buy quality? Why would you invest in something that's going to last 20, 30 years when you think, well, I'll want to change it next year anyway? So I mean, there is a lot wrapped up in that kind of quality argument that needs to be unpicked.
Yeah, and it feels like with the synthetics have enabled, in a way, the fashion industry to become what it is now. Like the fact that we've had this, which means it's also distorted what is possible to an extent. So you can't have an argument where it's like, oh, it's switching out polyester for cotton, unless you look at scale, because you still can't be reducing at that scale. So it's a complete kind of rethink of how that works. And from your side, Rob, how have people interacted with the kind of quality issue or understanding what they can do to look after their clothes as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one area that we focused on quite a bit, because obviously we've one of the things we've really talked about quite a bit is how to keep your clothes in use for longer. So if you've got them already, try to keep them longer. And as I say, whether that's how you wash them differently or learning to repair them or whatever, I think that's something we focused on quite a bit. And then I suppose the other thing is about alternatives to buying new. Well, so the importance of charity shops, and I'm going to very much take kind of Patrick's point. I mean, I think we're probably both at Leeds University around the same time, and that was a kind of vintage era for me for buying kind of secondhand clothes, because I think you're right. I think a lot of it from that time was 1960s kind of really good quality, kind of certainly men's clothing. But I think we kind of work with people to look at alternatives to buying new, which is why the charity shop map and the textiles map that we've got has been so kind of valuable to people. It gives people that kind of alternative to buying new. But then also looking at things like the clothing swaps and all that kind of stuff. So I think our perspective, we focused, as you would expect, because Zero Waste Leeds, we focused on the perspective of how can we keep more good clothing out of the bin, and how can we do give people other practical alternatives to kind of keep clothing in use for longer, either for themselves or finding someone else to kind of pass it on to or give it to.
Great.
We mustn't forget that taking clothes to the charity shops helps the charity shops, and the charity sector need this income, especially now, having had over a year of being effectively shut down. There's lots of it might be a bit more bother to take your clothes to a clothing recycle, but it is creating value for people that really need that help as well. And again, that's another way that we can feel slightly better about ourselves. And again, I think a lot of the point of fashion in the first place is about making ourselves feel better about ourselves, making ourselves feel happier. But, and I've made this point before, how can you really feel happy if you know about the system you are supporting? Whereas you can feel really happy if you're making positive choices for the environment and for the planet, and making choices that help other people along the way, like those people that are who do earn their money from charity shops, or who are making money from recycling or upcycling or running clothing swaps or whatever it has to be. Those are economic activities that do no harm, and that is we have to get into the mindset of supporting things that are harmless and or of minimal amount of harm, and that's quite a big shift, I think, for people to make.
Yeah, I think it's we've been playing things that are giving back locally, that are really connecting to things, as opposed to kind of extracting value, but actually generating that in the local area is so important. I think I feel like we could talk about this all day. There's so much in it, so many aspects, but thank you so much for joining us. I think that's all we have time for this evening. But thank you for telling us all about the work that you're doing, and for particularly thinking about how kind of local action can really connect and create this kind of systemic change that we're looking for in fashion. And it's been a great way to mark Fashion Revolution Week. So if anyone else would like to find out more about what's happening this week, check out the Fashion Revolution website. To those of you who are watching, I hope your conversation has given you an idea of the things that you can do, and some of the brilliant work that's happening in the UK. And I particularly encourage you to look at the work of Community Clothing and Zero Waste Leeds as well. So the RSA has been working with Zero Waste Leeds as part of our Regenerative Futures programme, which is exploring how we can build better and more just systems as we tackle the climate crisis. Find out more about the Leeds Fashion Futures work on our website. There's a new blog going up today, and there'll be more to come in the next few months. And I would love to as well to find out more about the work you're doing, Patrick. So hopefully more to come on regenerative fashion from the RSA as well in the next few months. But that's all that's left for me, is to say thank you to both of you so much for joining us. So thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you
very much. Cheers. Thank you.